What really happened to Linda Napolitano on November 30th, 1989? Was she abducted by aliens from her 12th story Manhattan apartment? Or was she a bored housewife dreaming up a wild sci fi thriller for her new friend, UFO researcher, and published author Budd Hopkins? Believe it or not, the astrological alignments that night have their own story to tell. And I'll take a look at that in this episode of Quantum Astrology. We'll see how the planets weigh in on one of the most phenomenal alien abduction stories of the past half century, at least, if not more shocking than the night Betty and Barney Hill claimed they were abducted on September 19th, 1961. Hello, friends, and welcome to Quantum Astrology, where I focus on using astrology to expand and evolve our consciousness, then put it into the quantum field so others can evolve their consciousness too. I'm your host, Yvonne Davis, and in this episode, I'm going to take a look at the astrology of the Manhattan Alien Abduction. Now, if you're not familiar with this, it's a docuseries on Netflix right now called The Manhattan Alien Abduction that illuminates an event reported in a book titled Witness, the Brooklyn Bridge Abduction by Budd Hopkins. I'm going to take you through the events leading up to the night that Linda Napolitano claims she was abducted from her Manhattan apartment by 3 alien beings. After reviewing the Netflix docuseries, which covers these events, I will look at the astrological chart for that night and see what it has to say. This is an important subject because we are entering a period when Pluto will be in Aquarius for 20 years, while Neptune and Saturn conjoin in 2 signs, Pisces and Aries. These configurations portend many years ahead in which our relationship with other intelligent beings, real, imagined, fantastical, and supernatural, will be in the forefront of our minds and transform our worldview. But one of the most important things we'll need to do is discern between truth and fiction. Before we take a look at this spectacular story and the astrological alignments on the night of November 30th, 1989, if you're enjoying this content, please give my channel some love. Click the like button, subscribe, share this with others who would enjoy it, and leave your comments below. I really appreciate all of you, and I long to create a community of people who are truly curious. When we're looking at whether or not there are intelligent life forms other than the human species here on Earth or coming to Earth, I would say that I'm a true believer. I just don't think it makes sense statistically that we could be the only intelligent life form in this universe or the most intelligent life form. I think statistically it makes sense that there are other beings, and they're either here on Earth or they're coming to Earth. They might have the technology, or they might be multidimensional. There could be so many different things going on that I just don't see how anyone could outright say it's not possible that other intelligent life forms are here on Earth or visiting us, that they can't consider all the different ways that that might happen, that these life forms could be already here, already living on Earth, or that they have the technology to get here, or they're multidimensional. There are just so many different ways that this could be happening. So I would call myself a true believer in that sense. There are so many examples of people saying they were abducted by aliens. I just don't see how we can outright say, that can't be happening. It's some kind of phenomenon. And that's what John Mack said. He was a psychologist, a Harvard psychologist and professor, and he said, it is a phenomenon. We have to figure out what this is. Is it psychological? Or is it real? We don't know. But so many people are having this experience that we need to at least address and acknowledge what is happening and find out what is the origin. What is the nature of these phenomena? So in that sense, I would say I'm also a skeptic. I absolutely do believe there's a phenomenon taking place, but I think that just because someone says they had an alien abduction doesn't necessarily mean that they did. So I'm a skeptic in that sense. The word skeptic comes from the Greek word skepsis, which means examination, inquiry, or consideration. And the Latin word skeptic means thoughtful or inquiring. So the word skeptic does not mean you don't believe. It's not like you're either a true believer or a skeptic, like they're opposites. You could be a true believer and say, yes, this is absolutely happening. And anyone who says it's happening to them is telling the truth. Or you could say, no, it's absolutely not true, couldn't possibly be true. And that would make you a non believer. A skeptic is someone in the middle who has an open mind and is curious and says, there are a lot of people saying this is happening. It's therefore some kind of phenomena. And what is the phenomena? Let's examine it. Let's do an inquiry. Let's just have a thoughtful consideration for what this might be. And so you're not completely 100% believing that everything everyone says is true, but you're also not discounting it out of hand. I wanted to be very clear that I am very open-minded. I definitely think that we are engaging with other intelligent life forms and that there is some phenomena going on. What it is exactly, I don't know. I'm open-minded. I'm curious. I think it's a fascinating subject. I want to learn more about it. And I will also say that I am a skeptic in the sense that it's something that I want to understand with as much evidence as possible. So, as an example, each particular case is unique unto itself. You can't just throw it in and say, well, she said she was abducted by aliens, so it must be true. Or, no, it absolutely cannot be true. I just want to see the evidence of each individual case and say, what is it about this? So I watched the docuseries on Netflix, and at first I was very open-minded because I did actually read the book years ago when it was first published and thought it was fascinating. And the most interesting part of it, in my opinion, is that there was a witness to this abduction. There's this claim that the Secretary General of the UN at the time was a witness to this abduction. And that always kind of piqued my curiosity. But there's another side to that which made me question things. And there's a lot of other stuff in here in the story that I will mention. So let's go ahead and let me tell you what is going on with the story of the Manhattan Alien Abduction. Linda Napolitano continues to stand by her story that she was abducted by aliens outside of her New York City apartment, November 30th, 1989. And that's the date I'm going to look at when I look at the astrology around this abduction. So Netflix's docuseries, The Manhattan Alien Abduction, revisits what happened before and after the extraterrestrial event, which 20 people reportedly witnessed. But the question is, did the abduction actually occur, or was it all a hoax? So in this three-part docuseries, which explores the events surrounding the alleged Brooklyn Bridge abduction, Napolitano maintains that she was taken by aliens from her high-rise in Lower Manhattan. The series includes interviews with both her supporters and her skeptics, notably critic Carol Rainey, who spent years working to debunk Napolitano's story until her passing in 2023. So what allegedly happened to Linda Napolitano? She was a New York City housewife and stay-at-home mom who said that on the night of November 30th, 1989, 3 extraterrestrial beings kidnapped her outside her 12th story downtown apartment. She claimed that these non-human beings made her levitate out of her window and into a spacecraft hovering above the city. Napolitano argued that the aliens performed experiments on her before returning her to her bedroom again. There are so many things that are considered evidence that make this story credible. And so I think it's important to examine this evidence and say, would it really hold up in a court of law? Which is actually interesting because apparently she is suing Netflix for running this docuseries. She was clearly a part of being interviewed for this docuseries. So why would she turn around and decide to sue Netflix? I'll touch on that in a bit. Anyway, a few months before the November 1989 incident, Napolitano sent UFO researcher Budd Hopkins a letter detailing a previous extraterrestrial encounter that she claimed to have endured during a weekend in the Catskills 13 years prior. So based on the math, it sounds like that happened in 1976. The docuseries has a short reenactment of that first abduction experience, but it's very brief. I'm not going to talk about what happened in the Catskills, whether or not she was really abducted, because there's no evidence included in the docuseries about it. It's just her word. She says that she was abducted and that she woke up outside with a bloody nose, and later she presented an X-ray to Budd Hopkins. So a few months prior to the Manhattan Alien Abduction that she claims happened in November 1989, she had already met Budd Hopkins. She had already written a letter to him. She was already involved in the support group for abductees. A few months after she gets involved with this whole movement, writing the letter to Budd, getting to know him as a friend, getting involved in the support group, meeting his wife, Carol Rainey, who was a filmmaker and filming this whole process, trying to understand it better. A few months after that, Linda suddenly has this absolutely extraordinary experience. It's considered one of the most extraordinary alien abduction stories. Napolitano said that she found a strange bump on the side of her nose that was eventually revealed, according to her, and an X-ray that she brought to Budd Hopkins that showed a strange foreign object inside her nose. So Hopkins believed that this was evidence that the aliens inserted an implant into her nostril. However, the object had allegedly disappeared when a specialist tried to remove it. So the only proof that was ever provided about this implant in her nose was an X-ray that she brought to Budd Hopkins. But Hopkins apparently never talked to anyone else, never talked face to face with the doctor who did the X-ray, never corroborated it with a second independent X-ray specialist. So it was really Linda's word and this X-ray that she brought to Budd Hopkins. Apparently, you can tape something to the side of your nose and X-ray the other side and it'll show through. So it's possible that she was able to get someone to help her hoax it. I'm not saying it's true or not true. I'm just saying it's possible that it could have been faked. The other interesting thing about this case is that there were about 20 people who allegedly witnessed the Brooklyn Bridge abduction. And after the event was made public, Hopkins claimed to have found over a dozen witnesses who saw Napolitano floating above her building. It wasn't like people came to Budd Hopkins prior to the incident and said, "You know, I saw this spaceship taking this woman out of her 12th story bedroom window." It was only after the incident, when it had already been put out into the public sphere. And then people came to him and said, "Oh, yeah, I saw this thing." So that doesn't rule it out, but it just makes it suspicious. And none of the actual witnesses were publicly identified or interviewed in Netflix's documentary. In his book, Witnessed, the true story of the Brooklyn Bridge abduction, Hopkins used pseudonyms for all the witnesses. And there's also no evidence that security officers Richard and Dan, who were allegedly stationed in a nearby car to guard the then UN Secretary General, actually existed. This claim is complicated by their communication with Hopkins, which was solely through the letters that he received. He never actually met them. And if you watch the docuseries, you'll see why these letters also came into question as evidence and whether or not they were written by these so-called security officers, Richard and Dan. Later, the Secretary General refuted that he was affiliated with the abduction. He wrote in a statement to PBS, "I cannot but strongly deny the claim that I have had an abduction experience at any time. On several occasions, when questioned about the matter, I reiterated that these allegations were completely false, and I hope that this statement will definitely put an end to these unfounded rumors. Now, you could say he was just protecting his reputation. He didn't want to be associated with the abduction. So again, you can't say for sure whether it was true or not, but he denies it. Napolitano maintains that there were real witnesses who saw what happened to her that night. She said, "If I was hallucinating, then the witnesses saw my hallucination. And that sounds crazier than the whole abduction phenomenon." The Netflix docuseries features alleged descriptions from several witnesses from that night, though their accounts differ significantly. For example, one woman claimed to have seen a bright light shining through her curtains, and yet she never actually opened the curtains to see what the bright light was. The two people who are really the primary characters in this docuseries are filmmaker Carol Rainey, who was formerly married to Hopkins and believed that Napolitano's abduction story was fabricated. She didn't doubt it at first. It was over time. She started to doubt it because it felt too much like a science fiction thriller. Like someone was writing a science fiction thriller and just handing it over to Budd Hopkins, who was already a published author. She'd already read all of the literature. It's like she was soaked in it. Here she is meeting this already published author, and they're becoming friends. They live in New York City together, and his wife is a filmmaker who's filming her. And so it sounds like she began to develop the story and then basically handed it on a platter to Budd Hopkins, who wanted to believe everything she said. So Carol Rainey was a filmmaker who was formerly married to Hopkins. She originally believed Napolitano's alien abduction story, but then later began to question it and ended up believing that the story was fabricated. In the docuseries, Carol Rainey explained how her husband, Budd Hopkins, hypnotized several people as part of his work and said Napolitano did not behave in the same way as most people do under hypnosis. And you can see that when they make the comparison. They show her being hypnotized, they show the others being hypnotized, and the way they behave is completely different, which is interesting because while Napolitano knew the stories, she had never actually seen the other people hypnotized. So she didn't know what they looked like when they were being hypnotized. So Carol Rainey claimed that Napolitano mimicked other people who had been hypnotized, and she did it on purpose. She says, "I felt that Budd had lost his objectivity." That's what she says in the docuseries. She said, "I don't know if it was through the Linda case or earlier, but I couldn't respect what I heard him do to those people who were vulnerable, very vulnerable. I had to try to protect other people from being tormented this way." She said she felt sick. She was literally sick of the whole business, and the only thing she could think to do was speak out about it. Meanwhile, Napolitano denied Rainey's accusations throughout the entire documentary, and she says, "She used my case and me and my family as a tool to get even with Budd." So now Linda Napolitano is suing Netflix, claiming that the project defames her, paints her in an unflattering light, and steals the work of an author who first wrote about her story more than 20 years ago. Her complaint alleges Netflix allowed Rainey to play a prominent part in the docuseries as an expert skeptic, when she was instead allegedly an embittered alcoholic ex-wife, hell-bent on revenge against her husband. She claims the docuseries negatively portrayed both Hopkins and Napolitano. Napolitano also said she agreed to have her story told by Netflix after she was promised only one interview with Rainey would be used, and that the true story of her abduction would finally be presented. Instead, she felt blindsided by a screening of the series in September. The complaint seeks an undetermined amount of monetary damages for 6 claims, including fraud, defamation, and breach of covenant of good faith and fair dealing. The Manhattan Alien Abduction is now streaming on Netflix, so I hope you will take a look at it and enjoy it. It's a very well done docuseries. It's worth watching just for its own sake. And if you're interested in the subject matter, I think you would also enjoy this docuseries. Along with that, you might find it interesting to read some of Budd Hopkins' old books. You can still get a hold of used copies. The first one he published was titled Missing Time, a documented study of UFO abductions in 1981, and then Intruders, the incredible visitations at Copley Woods in 1987, and then the story that is the foundation for this docuseries, the book he wrote titled Witnessed, the true story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abductions, which he published in 1996. So let's take a look at the Manhattan Alien Abduction chart, which would be for November 30th, 1989. What's interesting in this chart that really jumped out at me immediately was the fact that on that night she claimed she was abducted. The moon was conjunct Uranus and later made a conjunction to Neptune opposite Jupiter. Neptune is fabrication, deceit, imagination, fantasy, escapism. And one of the things that Carol Rainey said was that she eventually came to believe that Linda's story was the fantasy of a bored housewife based on everything I saw in that docuseries. And it wasn't really until the end that I started to put all the pieces together. I had always wondered why, if the UN Secretary General actually did have this experience of witnessing this abduction, why wasn't this a bigger deal? Why wouldn't he come forward and want to share this information? But then, like I said, maybe the opposite would be true. But that always made me question it. It just seemed strange that this prominent figure was involved in the situation and wouldn't own it. But now, with all the other evidence, and in my opinion, how flimsy it is, because again, it all came from Linda. Even the witnesses didn't come forward until after the story was made public. And then they came forward and said things like, oh yeah, we saw these bright lights. So that seems strange as well. The only piece left that I would say was in her favor was that her son claimed to have had an experience similar to her abduction experience, but he was so young. It's still hard for me to decipher whether he was capable of distinguishing between a dream, like a nightmare, and something that actually happened. I know myself, I had an interesting experience when I was a child, probably 3 to 4 years old, where I thought I saw 3 very short old people looking in the bedroom window. And I told my mother about it the next day, and she said to me that it was just a dream. I still to this day have no idea. And it doesn't matter because all I can tell you is that I thought I saw 3 people out the window. I was lying in bed. I thought I saw 3 people out the window, but it could have been a dream. There's no way for me to know. The difference is that because my mother told me it was a dream, it certainly didn't frighten me. I wasn't frightened of dreams. But if your mother told you it was real, that you really did get abducted by aliens, I could see that being extremely terrifying. And in fact, he's had therapy for years trying to deal with this traumatic experience. So again, I'm not debunking. I am just saying that it was one piece that I wasn't sure what to think of. The rest of it seems a little too flimsy, and so I've basically concluded that it probably didn't happen. It was probably Linda's imagination. She made the whole thing up, and that maybe her son had a nightmare, and she convinced him that it was real. So that's all I can say. That's my opinion. You may have a totally different opinion, but go and watch it. It's fascinating. One way or another, that conjunction of the moon to Neptune makes me think that it's not grounded in reality. And then it's also opposite Jupiter, which just magnifies that fantastical imaginary quality. So I'm going to say that after everything I saw in the documentary, thinking about it deeply, looking at the charts, I'm going to say I don't think it really happened. I think she made it up. And in a way, I'm kind of disappointed because, in a way, I kind of like to believe it was real. It's like, wow, that's amazing. But again, I think that if we don't separate out the cases that are real from those that are fabricated, then it muddies the waters, and then no one will be able to take it seriously. So that's the conclusion of this video on the astrology of the Manhattan Alien Abduction. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you're interested, stick around for the 3-minute short film that I made titled Night School. All right, see you again in the next video.